I want to talk for a few minutes about liberal education and intellectual liberation. This is, so to speak, academic freedom, understood not as protecting professors from being sacked for holding unpopular political views. Rather, it's to try to persuade you that the goal of liberal education is a kind of intellectual freedom, a sort of emancipation of students from whatever it is that one thinks they go to colleges, universities to be emancipated from, or whatever it is we think they go to colleges and universities to be enabled to become free to be. When John Stuart Mill was elected rector of St Andrews University in Scotland in 1867, he gave an address to the university which was more or less on my topic. That address runs to 45 substantial pages in Mill's collected works and took something like 3 hours to deliver. I want to spend no more than 20 minutes defending the thought that an education in the liberal arts is, if it is offered and accepted in the right frame of mind, an intellectual liberation. Liberal, literally, means free. That is to say, someone who is a liberal host is someone who dispenses his hospitality freely. Liberal education is, I hope I might persuade you, an education that liberates us from narrowness, from intellectual fear, from a fixation on our own immediate affairs and anxieties, and that ideally what it does is gives you a kind of citizenship in the world of human culture in all its varieties. It provides you, if you like, with a passport to the whole world of human culture. Talking about liberal education is less easy than it should be. I don't mean that a lot of people don't do it, because certainly in the early spring large numbers of people stand up at commencements and do precisely this. And indeed, during the opening exercises in the early fall, large numbers of presidents of colleges and universities get up and do it all over again. Nonetheless, it's not all that easy, or at least it's not easy to say anything that is both true and interesting. The reason, I think, is because we're tempted to make too many sharp oppositions that common sense then tells us to soften. And so we start off by making these sharp contrasts between liberal education and vocational education, between education and training, and then we have to go all the way back and start blurring these oppositions again. But let me start with the most common of these and blur it. Liberal education is often contrasted with vocational training. But one thing worth remembering is that liberal education actually was vocational training. It was the education that people got before they went off and practiced the liberal professions: law, religion, medicine, rather than the humbler crafts of husbandry and manufacture. The contrast between a liberal education and vocational training really isn't as acute as people think. And indeed, one of the most frequent sources of entertainment for anyone who spends their life doing teaching philosophy is the annual entry in the Chronicle of Higher Education, when somebody discovers all over again that the average incomes of persons who studied philosophy as undergraduates is higher than the average income of persons who did business studies as undergraduates. I myself think that the data are extremely unreliable, but that's another matter. But anyway, that's a contrast one shouldn't overstretch. Nonetheless, there's something to the contrast, and what there is to the contrast is more to do with the purposes for which we get educated. That's to say, the contrast between what we learn in the hope of cultivating ourselves and what we learn for some other and more utilitarian purpose. But that's not a contrast between education and training. Absent a great deal of training, rote learning in languages, for example, it is exceedingly difficult to learn anything for its own sake. Before you can, so to speak, master the glories of ancient Greek literature in the original, you have to learn Greek. And before you can learn Greek, you have to learn the Greek alphabet. And learning the Greek alphabet is the kind of thing that one really has to do as a form of training. So I want to steer away from simple contrast between the vocational, the non-vocational, education and training. Focus more on the idea that liberal education is an education intended to give people free access to the whole of human culture. So let me start dogmatically by saying that what liberal education aims to do is to give students the key to Aladdin's cave. And what the cave contains is all the riches of human culture. The whole of human learning, the arts, the sciences, music, the fine arts, everything that is an achievement of human culture. Part of the contents of the cave is its own history. To put it vulgarly, humanity did not emerge from the primordial ooze with a taste for Beethoven's late quartets. And there is at least one way in which history is perhaps the centerpiece of a liberal education. As the existentialist philosopher Heidegger remarked, we are thrown into the world. We weren't asked before we were born whether we wished to be born, when or where. One inescapable question, once we become fully conscious, is into what sort of a world have I been thrown? Whereabouts in it have I been thrown? And when in its career has this happened to me? To get answers to those questions, you need to answer the question, how did it get to be like this?